You ever see a man so calm it makes the whole room quieter just by being there? That was the kind of quiet Keanu brought to Gate B-17 at Portland International. No entourage, no flash, just a man in dark jeans, a soft gray hoodie, and a leather duffel that looked like it had seen every continent. His name on the ticket wasn't Keanu Reeves, it read K. Charles, a name that wasn't meant to be noticed, just recognized if you knew where to look. Flight 23-17, Cascadia Air, Portland, to Boston. First class, seat 1C. But when boarding began, that seat didn't wait for him. The woman at the gate counter, her name tag said Bethany, mid-30s, sharp blazer, sharper smile, didn't glance up as she scanned the boarding pass. "Sir, you've been reassigned," she said without checking his name or looking into the change. Keanu blinked slowly. "Pardon?" Bethany sighed, the kind of sigh people reserve for the invisible. "There was a last-minute request. VIP client. You've been moved to economy, seat 22A. She slid a new boarding pass across the counter like it was a favor. Keanu didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just picked up the slip of paper and walked. Behind him, a man in a designer jacket and aviators brushed past. Jeremy Lang, the kind of guy who talked with his chest and carried nothing but attitude. He didn't make eye contact, didn't thank anyone, just strolled right through with a smile that screamed entitled money. By the time Keanu reached 22A, the aisle was already full. A toddler was screaming in the row behind. A man in 23C was trying to fit a guitar case into an overhead bin clearly marked, "Small bags only." Keanu slid into his seat, pulled his hoodie up, and said nothing. The man beside him, Marcus, a middle-aged father with a kind face and a Red Sox cap, nodded politely. "Rough morning?" Keanu smiled faintly. "You could say that." They didn't talk much after that. But Marcus noticed something. The quiet guy in 22A had a stillness about him, like he wasn't uncomfortable, just watching. Up in first class, Jeremy Lang stretched out in the seat meant for someone else. He didn't know who. He didn't care. "Bumped some guy for me." He chuckled to the flight attendant. "Hope he enjoys the leg cramps." The crew laughed politely, but no one corrected him. Not Bethany, not the flight lead. The system had already accepted the swap, but they hadn't just moved a customer, they had displaced a storm. 20 minutes into the flight, Keanu opened his phone. Not to browse, not to scroll. A secure prompt blinked at him. Clause 9B initiate. Reason, breach of conduct protocol. He waited a moment, just breathing, then tapped, yes. Nothing happened on the surface. No beeps, no lights, no announcements. But, in the network of systems behind Cascadia Air, operations, compliance, legal, something had just ignited. Ownership protocols triggered. Stakeholder override in progress. Back in first class, Jeremy Lang ordered his second whiskey and leaned back. He laughed too loud, said something crude about regular people. No one stopped him. The woman in 2A pretended not to hear. The stewardess smiled like she didn't notice. Only one person noticed everything, and he was sitting silently in 22A. He wasn't here to argue. He wasn't here to explain. He was here to watch. And what happened next would turn a seat swap into a financial bloodbath. 29,000 feet above Nebraska, the plane hummed along like nothing was wrong. Drinks were being poured. Trays were being cleared. Laughter in first class. A child crying 2 rows behind Keanu. But behind the curtain, something had already shifted. Keanu sat motionless in 22A, his phone face down on the tray. The screen was dark now. The signal sent. Next to him, Marcus had dozed off, headphones barely staying on his ears. The world around them was ordinary, but beneath the surface, the system was cracking. At Cascadia Air's main operations hub in St. Louis, an alert pinged on a secure terminal. Clause 9B, operational ethics breach, live activation, in flight. It was rare, almost myth. a clause reserved for only the highest tier of stakeholders. Most employees didn't even know it existed, but the ones who did panicked. Who the hell triggered it? The shift supervisor, a woman named Lydia, leaned in close. K. Charles, the compliance officer, whispered. Manifest says he's in 22A. 22A? In economy? Lydia frowned. He's not supposed to be back there. Back on the plane, the flight attendants had started to whisper. Bryce, the lead, had received a quiet buzz on his crew tablet. A line of code flashing red. Do. Not override. Investigative mode active. Live monitoring. He felt a chill despite the perfect cabin temperature. Bethany, the gate agent, texted him. Did we accidentally bump a VIP? My logs showing escalation. He didn't reply, because just then his tablet updated again. Senior stakeholder present, oversight initiated, do not disclose. First class hadn't noticed yet. Jeremy Lang was still holding court, legs crossed, bragging about how he had 3 watches and no idea what time it was. Time zones are for assistants, he smirked. The crew laughed again, soft and nervous. Not because he was funny, but because they didn't know what else to do. Bryce stepped into the galley and whispered to Natalie, one of the younger attendants. We need to confirm something, he said. Guy in 22A. Can you check who he is? Natalie arched an eyebrow. He's some guy we bumped, right? No, Bryce said quietly. I don't think he's just some guy. Natalie peeked down the aisle. Keanu was still there, still calm, still. Something about the way he sat made her uneasy now. I didn't even ask for his name, she muttered. Bethany just said seat swap and I didn't question it. Bryce swallowed. That might have been the mistake. At the same time, a notification flashed across internal crew chat. A photo, a name. Keanu Reeves, majority silent stakeholder, Valtor Group Holdings below it, a single line. Do not engage unless instructed. Natalie stared. Her stomach dropped. Oh my God. Bryce closed the tablet. You understand what that means? Yeah, she whispered. We didn't just move a passenger, we displaced an owner. In 22A, Keanu leaned back, eyes closed. His hands were steady. His heart wasn't racing. He'd done this before. People mistaking silence for weakness. Politeness for permission. Familiar story. This time it was going to be different. In Zurich, the private control office at Valtor Holdings received the activation ping. A terminal lit up in a frosted glass room. A man in a black suit leaned forward, adjusted his glasses and muttered, Cascadia just crossed the line. He turned to his assistant. Start the sequence. Dump every share we hold. Full divest. But sir, that's over $480 million. Correction, the man replied. It was over $480 million, now it's gone. Back on the plane, Jeremy Lang had just requested his 3rd drink. Make it something top shelf, he said, snapping his fingers like he owned the sky. No one laughed this time. Natalie poured. The drink, hands trembling, because now she knew. Behind her, Evan, as the youngest crew member, whispered, He's the guy. In 22A, it's him, isn't it? Natalie nodded once, barely perceptible. Evan looked down the aisle, his voice dry. We moved the wrong man, and it was too late to move him back. By the time Flight 2317 crossed into Ohio airspace, the ripples had become waves. Keanu hadn't moved from seat 22A. He hadn't asked for his seat back. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't even opened his mouth since the moment he was told to move. But the world around him was already shifting. At Cascadia Air's headquarters in Seattle, the boardroom lights flickered on early. Someone had triggered an emergency shareholder meeting at 35,000 feet, and that someone had the authority to do it. The CFO, Randall Pierce, stood frozen in front of a glass wall, staring at a Bloomberg terminal. Valtor Holdings liquidated $487 million in stock in 90 minutes. Without a call? Without a word. And then came the second hit. Market confidence dropped. By 9:41 a.m. Eastern, Cascadia Air's stock had fallen 32%. A journalist from The Atlantic tweeted, Unconfirmed reports say Keanu Reeves, silent majority investor in Valter, was displaced from first class by airline staff. Stock in freefall. And with that tweet, the story went viral. Back in the sky, the plane hadn't changed course, but it had changed climate. Crew members moved slower. Passengers whispered more. Eyes kept drifting to the quiet man in economy. Natalie couldn't bring herself to speak to him. She couldn't even walk past his row without feeling like her chest was closing in. She had misjudged him completely, not just because of who he was on paper, but because she hadn't even cared to ask. Meanwhile, Jeremy Lang was still unaware, propped up in 1C, polishing off his third drink. He tapped his phone to check Wi-Fi, and finally noticed the alert. Keanu was moved. Cascadia collapse. Seat 22, he laughed at first, then stopped. The video that autoplayed was from a passenger sitting 2 rows behind Keanu. You couldn't see Keanu's face clearly, but you could hear everything. "Sorry, sir, your seat's been reassigned. Do you mind moving to economy?" "It's just a procedural request." Jeremy watched himself walk past the man, smug, entitled, loud. "Oh, hell no," he muttered, scrolling faster. Then he saw the market report, then the Valter ownership leak, then the photo. A clear shot, mid-flight, zoomed in from a side angle. Keanu Reeves. Not the actor today, not the character, the owner, the man who held the claws they were never supposed to trigger. Panic set in. In the crew galley, Natalie gripped the edge of the counter like it was the only thing keeping her standing. Her hands shook. Her chest tightened. Bryce came over, his own face pale. "We have to do something," she whispered. "What can we do?" "Apologize, move him back, say something." Bryce shook his head. He doesn't want the seat. And that's when it hit her. He never wanted the seat. He wanted the culture to not require a seat to be earned with a name. Back in economy, Evan, the young flight attendant, stood frozen with a tray. He had just offered a blanket to the woman next to Keanu. She had declined politely. But when he turned to Keanu, he hesitated. Keanu looked up. Not with anger, not with expectation. Just a look that said, "You knew, but you stayed quiet." Evan swallowed. "Sir," he began, his voice barely more than a whisper. Would you like anything?" Keanu didn't blink, didn't nod. He simply said, "Not right now." Evan stood there a moment too long, then nodded and walked away. 20 rows ahead, Jeremy Lang sat clutching his phone like a lifeline. He was no longer smiling. Because his name, had started trending too, and it wasn't in celebration. The curtain between first class and economy might as well have been a wall. In seat 22A, Keanu hadn't touched his tray. He hadn't watched a movie. He hadn't spoken another word. Yet row by row, passengers began realizing the silence wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Like a conductor waiting for the orchestra to realize they'd been playing out of tune. The couple in 20B and C whispered, "That's him, right?" "It has to be. He's not even doing anything." Exactly. In Cascadia Air's legal department, inboxes were imploding. Compliance officers reviewed every clause of the airline's ethics agreements. Clause 9B wasn't just a warning, it was a kill switch. At 10:16 a.m. Eastern, Valtor Holdings submitted a full compliance breach notice to the FAA and the DUTE. Every corporate office received it, and every executive knew exactly who had triggered it. Inside the aircraft, Natalie stood frozen in the galley, rereading the photo on her crew tablet. The man in seat 22A, the one she'd politely dismissed just 2 hours ago, now had the power to collapse a billion-dollar company. Her hands shook. Her mouth was dry. Her carefully trained hospitality mask had fallen apart. Bryce stepped beside her again. "He's not saying a word," Natalie whispered. "He doesn't have to," Bryce replied. They both stared toward economy like it was a courtroom. Meanwhile, Jeremy Lang had finally stopped posturing. He wasn't holding his glass anymore, he wasn't reclining, he wasn't talking. He was watching the cabin. watching people whisper and type and stare in his direction. His name was now trending under entitled investor, Jeremy in one seat on Reeves' revenge, and the worst part? He had no idea how to fix it. He stood up, awkward, unsteady, and walked toward the galley. Bryce stiffened. Natalie stepped back. Is he mad? Jeremy asked. I didn't know. I didn't mean anything. Natalie said nothing. Bryce gave a tight nod. You took a seat that wasn't yours and mocked the man you took it from. What did you think was going to happen? Jeremy stammered. I didn't know who he was. That's the problem, Bryce said coldly. You needed to know who he was to treat him with respect. Back in 22A, Keanu finally opened his notebook. No words, just initials, times, observations. At 10:32 a.m., he wrote one line. Respect. Delayed is integrity denied. He closed the notebook and opened his phone again. This time he entered a different code, 9B Audit FL23S7. Initiate review immediately. Across corporate offices, a red banner appeared. Live audit in progress, stakeholder triggered, all flight operations under evaluation. The COO of Cascadia blinked. Wait, he's auditing. The entire flight? While it's still airborne? Yes, sir, the assistant confirmed. Passenger interactions, staff conduct, incident logs, CRM entries, it's all being recorded now. The COO sat back in silence. Then we're not flying a plane anymore, he said. We're flying a verdict. Back in the cabin, the pilot's intercom chimed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We'll begin our descent into Boston shortly. We appreciate your patience today. But no one was thinking about descent, they were thinking about fallout. The passenger in 25A leaned forward. They say he's worth $2 billion, No, his seatmate whispered. He's worth more than that. He's got values. In the galley, Evan finally spoke. I should have said something when they moved him. Natalie nodded slowly. We all should have. But now, Keanu wasn't looking for apologies. He was tracking accountability. And from seat 22A, he had seen enough. The clouds outside the cabin window thinned as Flight 2317 began its descent into Boston. The skyline started to form in the distance, but no one on board was looking outside. They were all looking in. In seat 22A, Keanu Reeves placed his notebook into his bag. His phone screen was still dark. But every major terminal from Zurich to Seattle had already lit up. At Cascadia Air HQ, 4 executives were on a live video call. All pale, all whispering. He's triggering a clause-led audit mid-flight. This isn't just a PR nightmare. It's a structural dismantling, and it's already in motion. Valtor just pulled $487 million. You think they're stopping there? And while the suits scrambled for damage control, Keanu adjusted the cuff of his hoodie. Nothing about him said billionaire. Everything about him said wake-up call. Evan, the young flight attendant, stood just a few rows back, finally summoning the courage to speak again. His palms were sweating, but he stepped forward anyway. He stopped beside Keanu's row, cleared his throat, and leaned slightly closer. Mr. Charles, he began, voice low, respectful. We've been informed by operations that there was a serious oversight. Keanu looked up slowly, calm, still. Evan shifted, almost trembling. And, I'm sorry. For what we let happen, I should have spoken up. Keanu studied him for a moment, not coldly, not even disappointed, just measured. You weren't the problem, Keanu said softly. But you saw it happen. Evan's shoulders dropped slightly, the weight of that truth hitting him harder than any reprimand. Do better next time, Keanu said. Evan nodded. Yes, sir, I will. At the front of the cabin, the curtain rustled. Bryce, the lead attendant, walked out from the galley. His face was pale, jaw tight. He approached seat 22A slowly, every step measured like walking toward a judge. Sir, he began, swallowing. Operations has asked me to personally apologize. We now understand there was an egregious misstep. Keanu didn't move. I'd like to offer you your original seat, first class, now. Keanu looked past him toward the front of the plane. He saw Natalie watching from the curtain, hands clasped in front of her like a student waiting for a grade. He stood, not to reclaim a chair, but to let silence do what shouting never could. Passengers leaned into the aisles as Keanu walked the length of the plane, from row 22 to row 1, a short journey on paper, but in that moment it felt monumental. Each footstep pressed against the carpet like it held the weight of a verdict. He wasn't just returning to a seat. He was marking a boundary. When he reached first class, Jeremy Lang stood up quickly, awkward, flustered, his arrogance peeled back like paint in a storm. "Look," Jeremy began. "I didn't know. I didn't mean—" Keanu didn't even look at him. He simply turned to Bryce. "I'll sit," he said, "but not for the seat." He lowered himself into 1C, not as a luxury, but as a statement. And Jeremy? He was escorted out of first class by crew instruction. They said it was for operational compliance. Everyone knew what it meant. Across the plane, no one clapped. No one cheered, but there was an undeniable shift in posture. Not just reverence, recognition, the kind that comes too late, but sticks forever. Down below, Boston Logan Airport readied for arrival, but this wasn't the end of a flight. This was the beginning of a reckoning. The wheels touched down at Boston Logan with a soft jolt, smooth, steady, controlled. But inside Flight 2317 there was no polite applause, no stretch of relief. The cabin remained quiet. Not the comforting kind of quiet, but the kind that settles after a realization no one wants to speak aloud. In seat 1C, Keanu Reeves sat with his seat upright, hands folded, gaze fixed on nothing in particular. He wasn't looking to be thanked. He wasn't waiting for vindication. He'd already said everything he needed to Kai without a single outburst, because some storms don't come with thunder. In the terminal, chaos had already begun. News anchors scrambled over breaking headlines. Cascadia Air CEO faces questions. Over silent investor fallout. Seat 22A trends worldwide. Keanu Reeves silently dismantles a billion-dollar airline. At Cascadia Air HQ, the boardroom was full of lawyers, panic, and one central question. How do you fix a culture problem 35,000 feet in the air? The answer, unfortunately, was already in motion. Back inside the aircraft, Natalie sat on the jump seat, still and pale, her crew tablet dim in her lap. She'd read the article. She'd seen the screenshots. She'd watched the slow, digital collapse of the company's image, all because she didn't check a name and didn't care. To us, no excuses, no scripts, just regret. Bryce stood near the galley, phone buzzing in his vest pocket, but he didn't reach for it. The silence around him was louder than any ringtone. Jeremy Lang, the finance bro who'd once laughed his way into 1A, was now being quietly pulled aside by security at the terminal gate. "Mr. Langford," a suited officer said, "your privileges with Cascadia Air and its partners have been revoked pending investigation." Jeremy's mouth moved, but his voice had no sound. He had flown too close to power and mistaken it for furniture. The passengers began to disembark. Many walked slowly past Keanu without making eye contact, not out of rudeness, but out of reverence. Some nodded quietly. One whispered, "Thank you." Another just said, "I'll remember this." Evan, the young flight attendant, paused before stepping off the plane. He turned to Keanu one last time. "Sir," he said, "I signed up to serve with respect, not to overlook it. I'll carry this with me, I promise." Keanu nodded once. That was enough. At the gate, two executives from Valtor Holdings waited. Not handlers, not PR. Just two professionals who knew when to show respect without spectacle. They walked beside Keanu. No cameras, no entourage. Just presence. Behind him, the terminal buzzed with the realization of what had just happened. A man bumped from a seat had just reset an industry standard without ever raising his voice. And as the news continued to break, one headline rose. Above the rest, power isn't who sits in 1A, it's who stands for what's right in 22A. 3 days later, Evan's handwritten note went viral. To the man in 22A, I'm sorry I stayed quiet. But I won't next time. Valtor matched his personal donation tenfold, anonymously. Cascadia's board dissolved their executive leadership within the week. Natalie stepped away from flying, and Jeremy Lang disappeared from public life. But Keanu? He said nothing publicly. No interviews, no tweets, no TED Talks. He simply returned to work, rebuilding from the inside out. The audit continued quietly. New training, new leadership, new standards, and everyone, from passengers to pilots, now knew the weight of silence, especially the silence of a man who didn't need a title to hold the room. He wasn't loud, he wasn't angry. He was clear. And clarity in a world full of noise is how revolutions begin. If this story moved you, let us know. Drop a comment. What hit hardest? The injustice, the quiet correction, or the man who didn't need to speak to be heard? And tell us where in the world you're watching from, because your silence, that's a choice. And this time the world listened.